Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Ethics Experts. And if you're subscribed to the Ethics Experts, then welcome to the show. We're so glad you're listening today. Today, we have an awesome show with Adam Hunt. We talk about his role at Netflix, growing that team from basically 1 to 14 people, about how he drives a culture of compliance tied to the strategic value drivers that the board is looking at. And he provides some great perspective on managing your career, getting, taking a look at where you are on your journey, and also some really good tips on how you can be an enabler as a compliance and ethics leader by taking the rocks out of people's boots, by making things smoother, and by helping people make better decisions. This is the vision that we have as ethics and compliance leaders. Adam has lived it out, and he has some great things to share with us, including some information about his new book that's going to be released soon called Be Happy Law, More Joy and Less Stress for the Busy Modern Lawyer. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
All right, everybody, let's jump into this conversation. We have an awesome episode, and I'm excited to introduce Adam Hunt to you. Adam Hunt has had a really exciting career in law and compliance. He went to UCLA undergrad, Northwestern, shout out to my alma mater, for law school. I didn't go there for law school, but went to Northwestern University in Chicago. He's had a bunch of high-profile matters for international law firms, including doing a deal for the LA Dodgers. He worked in compliance and ethics at Sony Pictures, and maybe we'll talk about a big issue they managed there. And he was the leader of global ethics and compliance at Netflix, building that team from basically one person to 14 across 7 countries. And if that wasn't enough, Adam is a multiple-time entrepreneur and soon-to-be 2-time book author. Coming out soon is his second book, Be Happy Law, More Joy and Less Stress for the Busy Modern Lawyer. Adam, welcome to the show today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks a million for having me. It's congrats on closing in on 200 episodes almost. And it's just really a privilege to be here, given how many truly terrific thought leaders that in the ethics and compliance space that you've had on this platform. I went all the way back to the very first episode with Christy Grant Hart. Yeah. It's really incredible. And so I just really appreciate being here, and hopefully I have something additive, some additive insights for your audience.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Adam. We're really proud of the great minds that we've been able to share the space with, and I think you're well at home among them. So yeah, let's jump into it. Why don't you just give us a little bit of your perspective on how your career in law and compliance has progressed? Like, we can kind of see the LinkedIn flyby, but what has that journey been like for you, and how have you made major decisions about how you want to direct your career?
Yeah, on the origin story front, there's this saying about how life makes sense backwards, but you have to live it forwards. And I think it's really funny for me to look back. As an undergrad at UCLA, I worked for a company that was just getting in to the ethics and compliance online training space. This is more than a few years ago now. And I was basically just a go for there, go for this, go for that. And now years later, to be looking at roles leading, global compliance orgs, it's trip. It's not something that I would have anticipated or predicted when I was back at that company. And last week I actually just looked up the graduation from UCLA, the graduation ceremony, and the theme was actually on ethics and compliance. It was pomp, circumstance, and ethics. Do the right thing. And it was actually the chairman, the president of the company I was working for was the graduation speaker. So I got a little shout out, thousands of people all turning to look for me and all that. So yeah, it was just funny to see things kind of really come full circle.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, we all walk this journey in our life one step at a time, and you may have some sense of the summit that you're trying to climb toward, but don't always know how it's going to go. So I think that I appreciate you sharing that with us. That's a cool moment to see that leader kind of shout you out and see that represented at UCLA.
Yeah, it was definitely an experience for sure. And I think just to the part of your question about making decisions and going forward, I really just focus on what's the best decision for right now. I think back in those UCLA and law school days, it was very much kind of a regimented lockstep, looking at everything like a ladder. And there's a great compliance leader out there, Spiro Karetsos. He was at Google, and now he's the chief compliance officer at Remitly. And he talks about your career being more of a monkey, like a gymnasium or monkey bars than a ladder. And that really resonates for me, kind of looking backwards. And that's a lot of what I get into with Be Happy Law. It's a little bit about enjoying the ride, doing what's meaningful in the moment versus saying, oh, I have to, like playing what I call the I just game. I just have to do this. I just have to do that. Right. That happens a lot in law school. I feel like I just have to make law review. Oh, I just have to get that first job. I just have to get partner. And I think a lot of what my learnings have been kind of getting out of that game.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's in some ways maybe motivating to say, I just have to do this. This is the next important step. But that can quickly kind of become its own hamster wheel of there's always a rung after that, maybe is not going to be any more fulfilling than the last one. So that's great perspective.
Right. And then are you enjoying the rung or the stage or the part of your journey you're at right now?
Yeah, it's big. That's a big part of it. So let's kind of stay high level for now. You've had a pretty far reaching career across a bunch of different disciplines. How are you seeing that, the broader culture around corporate compliance is changing? And, how has it been to experience that kind of, we'll get deeper into, your roles and things like that. But what do you think is coming next, or what do you think is important to be top of mind for ethics leaders right now?
Sure, there's a lot there. So I'll give you a couple beats and then we can
Sure.
kind of double click or dive in if you want. I think if I zoom out high level, I think it's really about the field now is heading towards business enablement and how do we keep the good things happening? And it's really just a different mindset. It's not risk mitigation or minimization necessarily, but it's more risk optimization. And then again, staying high level, I just finished a course at Carnegie Mellon University on risk management. And I think there's all these adjacent risk functions and risk domains that you have: InfoSec, privacy, compliance, ethics. And really you end up with a bunch of different organizations or domains within a company doing risk assessments or looking at similar adjacencies. And I think the movement is towards a more cohesive approach and just really looking at risk more generally and more holistically. So I think that's at a high level where I see the direction of travel. Then cool. The other piece, yeah.
So let's talk about that for a second. What do you attribute that to? Is that just a natural progression in the maturity of this discipline? Do you think it's a change in mindset or a change in the risk landscape? I think we all kind of feel the tension of that from different directions, whether it's, who's getting the budget for this or who gets to pick the software platform for these, similar and overlapping functions across different pillars within risk management. What do you think is driving that, or like, why do you think that's happening now?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I look at that piece, I was just at a chief compliance officer dinner in San Francisco a few weeks ago. And one of the guests, or the kind of featured guest, was a private equity person who really kind of unpacked what corporate leadership, he's not in the compliance space. It was just kind of from the outside looking in. And it's really helpful, I think, for compliance leaders and compliance professionals to get that perspective. And kind of zooming out, the focus was really just about what's driving business efficiencies, how, what's really essential for businesses. And so I think that at a high level, the key is really there's just this outside pressure on the corporate, on profits, earnings, all that. And so I think that the more that we can connect the compliance effort and impact to the business outcomes, that's really what's driving this. Is I think when I look back over the last, 5-10 years, maybe longer, you have sometimes compliance on one side and the business over here. And so I think the convergence and what I'm seeing, what I'm really passionate about is aligning the compliance activity with the business outcome.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And, I think it's to kind of get to reference that kind of career, whether it's a ladder or a monkey bar. There's been this thing, in compliance kind of as long as I've been around it, where leaders want to be part of the executive conversations and have a seat at the table with the board and things like that. But also as you get into those conversations, the the focus of that discussion changes. And it's, maybe it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing to be kind of invited into the conversation and then ready to lead it. But, I've been talking with some ethics experts who, are realizing that it's kind of a new skill set. We did we did an ethics verse webinar a couple weeks ago on just that executive communication and how to present well to the executive team and stuff. That, I think that a lot of ethics leaders are excited to have that opportunity, but then also realizing, maybe this is kind of what the private equity leader you were talking about references, kind of understanding that that's a different context and it maybe takes a different way to communicate or a different skill set than some of the more kind of blocking and tackling execution of a compliance program.
100%. And I think I have a link to that Ethics Verse webinar that I need to catch up on. So thanks for reminding me about that. I think it's really about looking at how can we facilitate as leaders more risk-informed decisions and discussions. And I think that one of the things I love about being in compliance is you're kind of across all the regions, all the functions. And so you have this really unique perspective and you can really help connect dots for a leadership team. So yes, you have to be invited to the table, but once you're there, I think you can really kind of synthesize a lot of different things. And so I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for compliance leaders right now and kind of in this moment.
Yeah. And I really like that concept of, just labeling it as risk optimization, right? Because, giving, the board or the CEO or the CFO just a list of risks and ways that things can go bad and things to watch out for. It's not facilitating good decisions, right? It's informative, but it's like, okay, well, what is the chance of that happening, or how do we mitigate it, or how might we approach this differently? Is I think a role that ethics and compliance needs to be playing more and more. Both need to be welcomed into and to be able to contribute to how to optimize how we treat that risk, because it's not an option in today's day and age to just try to avoid as many risks as possible. That's not on it. I don't think that's on any board's top 2 strategy items. It's something that we need to manage and optimize in order to get the mission done.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's really honing in on what's material, right? What's going to move the needle. And again, going back to the private equity leader who sits on a number of different boards, he was not very interested in seeing compliance training metrics, right? They just, and I think a lot of compliance leaders, when I talk to people, my peers have had the experience of like, you might end up just getting 2 minutes or 30 seconds at the end of a board meeting to really highlight what's essential, right? And there's a great book called Essentialism that just focuses on this idea that you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And I love applying that in the compliance space and really saying, okay, across all of this compliance activity that we're doing, what are the things that are going to be most material? So I think that really aligns with what you were saying.
Yeah, it's I think it's so hard for us, right? Because we, as ethics experts, we feel like we need to get our arms around all the risks and we feel like we're responsible for all these different things, but we need to have that executive function to say, yes, we do, and I can't do it all, so what do I focus on?
Totally. And I want to jump ahead into Netflix if you're planning on getting there, but one of the ways that we did this and kind of to talk tactics a little bit, I always had this idea for a compliance EKG and really think about like looking at the blips and really, so you can really focus the team's time and energy and attention on where the outliers are, right? Where the big, that outlier donation is, or where that, where those red flags are that are surfacing kind of unexpectedly. And so I was finally we had a great hire, Tamara Cook, who came over from Autodesk, and she was able to actually build this great platform for us internally. And I think that the more that you can use, that's where you can use the data and the analytics and the metrics to actually focus your kind of limited bandwidth on those meaningful metrics.
Yeah, that's so cool. So yeah, let's jump into the Netflix story. I mean, I think a lot of us have heard about or, maybe even admired the Netflix growth story. It's obviously, as a company and a service has transformed a lot of the ways that we do things in our lives. And, you had a really interesting run there. Talk to us a little bit about, what it was like when you came in and a little bit of that growth story to, grow that team so much over the time you were there.
For sure. I joined in 2018 when there was just shy of 6,000 employees, and it just felt like this really well-funded startup. I was at Sony Pictures at the time, in-house compliance counsel there. I came over and had this opportunity, this amazing opportunity under the leadership of Hillary Ware to build an entire global ethics and compliance org. And at the time it was a paralegal. So a paralegal and so I look around and think, wow, this is, $100 billion company. We have a lot of work to do. So the first thing kind of, you want to have a quick win. And there was this immediate issue of like, we need a compliance training course that doesn't suck. And they had a very traditional, when your company is making amazing content, you have a pretty high bar. And that's, the dream team as part of the Netflix, ethos as it is. So I came in and the first thing I did was, produced and we self-produced this really fun piece of content that got used and is still used globally for our production personnel, which and we just had these animals doing kind of bribey character, acting out scenes. And we had people from all the different functions that were actually doing the voiceover. So we had a lot of fun, and we really brought some kind of quirkiness and some fun to, what can traditionally be a pretty, less than exciting piece of content.
Yeah. So what led you to that as the first piece? Was it just because production was so like essential and core at Netflix? Was that tied to certain risks that you saw? Because, it's always kind of to the origin story. It's, I'm sure that led to a bunch of other things, right? You built relationships through that. You understood the compliance program more by the time you had kind of fully produced that. But like, that was kind of an early bet that you made to say, hey, we're going to produce this piece of content, instead of 17 other things to get to the essentialism that you could have put up first. What drove that for you? What gave you that conviction?
Yeah, I love that you call it a bet. Netflix talks about freedom and responsibility, and it's really exciting when you're on the outside. I'm like, well, I'm going to have all this freedom and responsibility. Then you get there and it's like, oh, I need to deliver, and this needs to actually be amazing. So it comes with some pressure too, and accountability, right? But that's part of what's so exciting of being there and having that opportunity to do it and having the freedom to just do this content. But the short answer is, the focus there was a vendor contract that was coming up so we needed to replace the learning management system already. A big driver for the hire for me to be the first compliance counsel the company ever had was Netflix had just made this big bet and was just moving into global international production. And so that was a big emerging kind of risk that had already been identified by my boss, who kind of created the position and had to pitch it to leadership at Netflix of why do we even go there? And that whole, that was a challenge, right? Because you have a co-founder, Reed Hastings, who went on to write a book called No Rules Rules. So that was always something in building the team when trying to hire and get talent. People saying, well, I mean, at the time, the culture memo when I joined said we don't have a compliance department. So if you go back and I'd actually pull that, did some screenshots for my presentations because it was a big deal when that came out of the culture memo. So that was a big win for me and the team, after about 12 or 18 months after my first one-on-one with Reed Hastings, when that kind of line quietly came out of the culture memo.
And I want to talk about that line and that kind of treatment of the compliance program. But, as we move on from you kind of stepping into making this training video as one of your kind of big first projects, what I heard as you described that was not that everyone should just upgrade their training video the first time they come into a new job. There was something there about the inherent risks, the changing strategy of the company, the culture of the business around, this growing centrality of like production within the business. I think that your ability as a leader to tie those things together and say, hey, this is something that's going to be impactful on our risk stance. It's going to be impactful on like getting in front of employees, to me is not just around like everyone should do better training. They should, but not necessarily all the time right away. But you strategically saw that as something that wove together a few of these kind of key business goals, and sounds like you had a great outcome with it.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to comment on that?
We just got to do a premiere and, have some popcorn. It was fun.
Fun.
We just, trying to have fun. It was a good, opportunity, like you said, to connect with people across the business and really start to say, hey, this is how we're put our, stamp on kind of how we're going to do compliance here, and how we're going to be successful at a company that kind of has an inherent skepticism of the function. And then the next project after that was, we need to do a risk assessment because we've never done a compliance risk assessment. So some of this wasn't like brilliant prediction. Some of this was like, let's get, the foundational, let's just go down, the DOJ guidelines and make sure that we're ticking off the things that we need to.
Yeah, it's not always profound what you're doing, but very often it's profound in how you do it and how you approach it, and navigating those cultural changes. Let's talk a little bit about that culture of no rules. Reed Hastings is pretty famous for it. It sounds like you guys had some interaction around that. It's obviously, to me, that you drove some significant kind of cultural leadership change to envision the importance of, what is ultimately going to be a structured compliance program in a company that seemed to kind of thrive and be so successful with, seemingly like the lowest possible amount of that like prescriptive structure. So how'd you navigate that, or what was that like?
Yeah, I'd say it was scary. My first one-on-one, to be totally honest. He was before he moved to an executive chairmanship position. Reed was meeting with directors periodically, and so that first one-on-one, he literally said, "Why are you here?" So, which would have been surprising, except my boss kind of gave me a heads up, sneak preview that question might be coming. And that was back when Walmart was in the thick of their, every quarter they were reporting in their, quarterly earnings, how much they were spending on compliance investigations, even without having an adverse, outcome or decision at that time, but just all of the cost. And what I really landed on was just helping the company avoid distractions and disruptions. It goes back to this idea of keeping the good things happening. Right. And one of the great things about doing compliance at a place like Netflix, I think it's so important wherever you are to really have your message resonate with the culture of the company where you are. Right. It really needs to land. So being able to pull, they actually have a tool where you can create your own clips from Netflix content. So I'm a big into sports, and when they started doing this F1 racing show called Drive to Survive, we kind of co-opted that, called it Drive to Comply, and could literally pull, clips of race cars going around the track. And, we talk about, we're not trying to avoid spin outs, right? So we have some funny little minor things, but we're trying to avoid these big compliance collisions that, result in explosions. And so I think talking authentically and in a relatable way, with whatever the currency of your company is, and Netflix, again, we just had this great gift of like being able to have a lot of fun and creativity in a way that, might be more challenging at other places. But I think with AI now, it really unlocks the ability for any compliance organization to really do some interesting stuff, or, call someone, a great vendor that can also help them. There's a lot of different paths.
So maybe we can talk a little bit more about how that perception of compliance changes, because I think oftentimes it's easy for, a compliance leader that is maybe receiving some resistance or not getting the buy-in that they want to characterize the leadership or the board or whatever as just, they don't care about ethics and they don't get it. I think oftentimes, kind of similar to what we were talking about before, they're trying to balance a bunch of different things. So like what were some of the wins that you had along the way to drive, this more, better buy-in, right? You grew the team 14x. I'm sure there were a bunch of things that contributed to that. And I imagine that those were not you getting someone to all of a sudden think that it's not okay to, harass people or something, right? It's probably not a change in like someone's complete view of like what's wrong in the world, but of like where this thing fits in the organization. How did you kind of progress through that, or what are some wins that you got along the way?
For sure. I think it really comes down to flexibility and curiosity. The team build, it was a slow build. It wasn't, and it was really just a focus on following the business and getting the right people in the right places. So, in the first year or two, it went from 1 to 4. Then I inherited trade compliance when Huawei got put on an entity list on a trade sanctions ban. So things just kind of evolved organically. I was really having the flexibility to be able to roll with that. And then on the curiosity part, it's really just goes back to what we talked about earlier, like you touched on, about solving the business problems and supporting the business, right? And there was this great HR leader at Rippling. Her name's Christine Smith, who was just on a panel earlier this year. And I love how she talked about figuring out how to take the less meaningful work out of the equation and how do you remove pebbles from shoes of people. And I just love this idea of taking the pebbles, or I mean, you can insert stone or thorn, whatever you want to use. But that analogy of Christine's, I think it's really about how do we make it so that people can just focus on doing what's the most meaningful and impactful work is, right? And I think the biggest win kind of most recently at the end of last year was using Zendesk to be able to automate our due diligence. And this was another Tamara Cook project where actually just putting the agency on the business and the line of business folks to just go in, be able to submit a ticket. 99% of the time, your due diligence is coming back without red flags, right? And having a compliance person in the middle of that loop just adds drag to the whole process. So to get that person out of the loop and being able to automate that end to end, starting with Zendesk and then going into our due diligence provider, it just made the whole process a lot, more painless and frictionless for our clients, right? For our stakeholders. And so I think those are the kind of things that that was a big win. And I think just thinking through that mindset of how can we help the good things happen and make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. That's really what I focused on.
Yeah. I just really love the way that you talk about this because, I think that as you're talking about it, maybe it seems obvious or people say, yeah, I'm trying to do that. But, you're talking about this kind of these incremental gains, right? Earlier you said removing distractions. You talk about removing pebbles from people's boots and, allowing people to do their best work. I think if we start with this mindset of like, there are these big scary things out there and we have to control everything in order to stop these big terrible things from happening. It ends up being a limiting way to approach things because at some point people are going to say, okay, well, if that's all we're doing, we're probably not going to like bankrupt the company by like, pushing this through this process or going more quickly. But if you have that curious mindset and you say, hey, how can I make sure that like we get done what we need to get done from an ethics and compliance standpoint without being, in the way of this? It really opens up a much broader purview for you to collaborate with people and say, hey, can I slip into this process or audit this or check it or whatever without slowing you down and actually facilitating the business to run faster? It's probably like a little bit more complex and, you need kind of a broader imagination to figure out how to do that without just being the brakes on the car. But, if and when you can do that, you're probably going to be welcomed into a lot more conversation than they say, okay, cool. I'm still going to be able to get done what I need to get done. And we're not going to have these, problems and distractions. It just the way that you're talking about it seems a lot more collaborative, a lot more kind of looking for these small gains and how do we get this done together instead of kind of being that, that caricature of just, being the barricades for things.
Totally. Yeah. Barricade wouldn't fly at Netflix at all. Not that it would fly anywhere, but particularly wouldn't fly there. And to pull some of those threads all together, I think the thing that was impactful about the automation project for this due diligence workflow, and yes, it's just one, particular example, but the company was really focused on improving their margins, right? Sequentially, quarter over quarter, year over year. And so that project, by reducing, cost and time and energy on this workflow, indirectly, that it's us connecting compliance action and activity directly to that bottom line impact of, hey, we're going to reduce cost, spend, effort, energy on this part of the process. So I think that's just one example of how you can better connect. And then you get metrics around, hey, we drove, up time and responsiveness. We drove down the time that compliance personnel was spending, right? Those are metrics that are meaningful. And then that's what you can talk about with your leadership, whether it's in legal or otherwise, about, hey, this is how compliance is playing its part to this broader business impact. And I think there's so much. Every conference you go to, they're going to talk about what's the business impact, what's the ROI on the compliance program. And if you can quantify the reduction in drag through a project like that, I definitely think it's worth doing.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, I think that some ethics leaders get hung up in saying, well, I don't know exactly how to build a multivariate equation to say what the dollar return is on this, Zendesk integration or whatever it is. But, being a little bit creative in understanding, well, hey, let's reduce those times, or let's make these things go faster or increase the throughput. You don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a percentage, improvement on the dollars invested. You can show, hey, we're improving these things and these tie to this strategic input or the strategic outcome that we're running toward. And when you start speaking people's language like that, it really opens things up. I think that if you can avoid staying back from the conversation because you don't have the exact precision and saying, hey, this is what we have for now, we'll get better metrics as we go, it can really open things up.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And there's a great book that can be an entry point or a gateway to folks that want to get a little bit more kind of better or build some skills around the quantification piece. It's called How to Measure Anything by Douglas Hubbard. And there's some great tools on the website, and it really demystifies this kind of idea around the quantification. And I think for any compliance leader, kind of this where we are, going back to where we are, where we're going, I think that's definitely something that's well worth the time to give it a read.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for suggesting that. Speaking of great books, I want to get to the one that's coming out, but talk to us a little bit about Surthriving Law School and beyond. Kind of what drove you to write that, and what is the impact that you hope it has when someone reads it. This is kind of intended for people going through law school. Is that right?
It was a pandemic project, a passion project. I had always I'd written a couple articles as an associate at the law firm about the OCI process, the on-campus interviewing process, which I felt like I had interviewed. I got a job for a firm, Heller Ehrman, that actually went bankrupt my 3L year. So I re-interviewed as a 3L. It was quite a nerve-wracking period. So by the end of all of those rounds and callbacks, multiple cycles, I'd interviewed about 100 times, roughly, when I counted it all up. So I felt like I had so I started with just a LinkedIn post, and then that led to 2 or 3. And I kind of there's this organic build of like, hey, I want to help people, navigate things with some advice and guidance that I didn't have. And so that's really was the genesis of this Surthriving, law school idea, was how can I get advice and just demystify the process, not just for OCI, but let's expand it. Let's zoom out and talk about your first year, your second year, your third year, and then moving on after that. And especially because, as you kind of highlighted at the top of the show, I've done in-house, I've moved between offices at the same law firm, I've moved law firms. So I just felt like I had some insights to share. And then as it turned out, when I started sharing it, just getting feedback from law students, there was a gap. There was an experience gap. And I realized, I don't have enough perspective. I need to be a little bit more inclusive and go out. And I ended up getting 10 guest contributors. And I think that was what makes the book impactful, because there's a pro bono perspective, there's a federal prosecutor perspective, there's a clerk perspective. And so, looking back, I wish I had not been so arrogant to think, I just have this one great idea, but at least I got the feedback and was able to pivot there and include all these other great perspectives. So I just hope that it helps people that might not have a mentor or that might come from a less privileged background to get some advice, or that are just curious about what's it like being a big law partner. We have a Gibson Dunn partner, a former Gibson Dunn partner, added a chapter. So it really attempts to kind of demystify a lot of the process for people that are thinking about law school, and also give practical advice for people that are currently in law school or graduating. So I hope it's a valuable contribution.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think it speaks to your curiosity and humility that you were looking for that feedback, that you accepted it, processed it, and brought some other perspectives in. And it sounded like it ended up being a really great book. And Adam, I appreciate your heart to give back and to, be a mentor through a book to some people that obviously could benefit from that advice. So talk to us a little bit about Be Happy Law, More Joy and Less Stress for the Busy Modern Lawyer. Why was this something that you felt like was a book that needed to be written?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, this is the second pandemic passion project, and it was really a result of the kind of learnings and self-reflections of going through that kind of shared, trauma and ordeal that everyone went through. And I went from commuting. I live in Washington State, and I went from commuting every week down to California or Singapore or Mexico or all the different places where Netflix had offices to just being on the island. I live on a place called Bainbridge Island, Washington, and then coming out of that, it was I was doing camper van trips. I was trying to figure out is it safe to fly on an airplane yet? Going through all that. And so I just literally took some, journeys through life from Washington down to California, and just had an opportunity to go with the flow a little bit more and get off that track. And I compare it to when being in a car, if you're on your phone, and no one should ever be texting and driving or on your phone. But sometimes I think that a lot of people, when I mentor them and talk about moving in-house or lawyers, aren't necessarily the happiest bunch. And I think a little bit of this is just about slowing down, literally rolling your window down or getting out of that car to think about what matters most in life. And it's really just a very kind of vulnerable sharing my journey in the hopes that resonates and gets maybe people to kind of do some introspection and on their end to see like, oh, and let people know there is another path. If you're on the big law track, it doesn't have to be the ladder. It can be the monkey bars.
Cool. Yeah. And hopefully the monkey bars are a little bit of fun, not just grind, and you can enjoy the journey a little bit, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
What else would you like to talk about? You want to talk about, this book and the launch? This book is coming out soon, so we'll be excited to promote that when it happens. Any kind of final thoughts or another topic that you want to hit as we wrap up?
I just think that the connection, like for me, I really center on integrity and connection. And I think that what's really meaningful about being a compliance professional is being able to bring that voice into the business world. And there's not a lot of jobs out there where I think you can be that person that can say, I'm seeing a lot of, maybe no's or a lot of people that aren't comfortable, but I'm going to name that. So I think one thing is just to encourage everyone to use their voice. Going back to Spiro, he talks about the compliance superpowers, right? You get to be independent. He wrote this great article, a few years back. And I think that like when you start thinking about, and going back to the ethics verse, right? Superheroes, superpowers, I just think that there's so much there that if you change your mindset, you can really change how you approach our work. And so I think that's really the thing I want to emphasize for the audience is how you think about and how you're approaching kind of the challenges and what's ever in front of your desk.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think just that mindset and that perspective can open things up so much for us, right? Like this compliance role, it is a job, right? There are challenges that we need to meet. There are problems we need to find solutions to. And increasingly, as we expand our purview and get invited to more of those strategic conversations or get the budget for the things that we're trying to do, it's kind of making that bet, right? There's some trust that's being given to you. And then we need to perform in that new arena for that new thing. And Adam, I appreciate you helping us see how much of that next step might be a different approach. It might be being more curious. It might be being more integrated with some other functions, like some of the things you've talked about. It might be, considering how this thing that we know is essential to risk management or ethics also aligns with something that's, strategically important for the company or something that a key stakeholder will want to leverage. And I think that expanding our mindset for those things and seeing how this next step, yes, is a challenge, but also, is something that we've been ready for and that we can be creative and collaborative and integrated enough to meet that challenge. It's a great encouragement, Adam. I appreciate you, helping us get that perspective.
For sure. I gotta say, you've heard me talk about a lot of other folks in the compliance community during the course of this conversation, many of whom are your guests. And I just do want to encourage everyone to connect on LinkedIn. That's kind of my platform of choice. And just really look at and talk to everyone around in the community to see what they're doing. The chief compliance officer at Coca-Cola has this great LinkedIn tagline. Her name's Julie, and she says, "I help business leaders make tough calls and do the right thing." So really just focus on connection and integrity. And I think, and connecting with our peers and I'm just excited to see where everything goes from here.
Awesome. Well, our guest today has been Adam Hunt. Thanks for joining us on the Ethics Experts. Adam, it was great to hear from you. I appreciate the way that you not only share your genius with us on the show, but give back through your books, through networking, through speaking engagements, and the ways that you invest in us all building a stronger community for ethics and compliance so we can do this important job better. Thanks for being with us, Adam.
Thanks so much for having me on.